tremendous strides towards reducing poverty, improving living standards, and expanding trade. But the recession now has thrown some things off course, and although developed countries are struggling with their own financial difficulties, the developing world's challenges also loom up. Rajat Nag is the Managing Director General of the Asian Development Bank based in the Philippines. He is in Ottawa today, and you see he's here in our studio. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
Now, there's been a lot of talk, particularly at the G20, about, well, we can't forget the developing world. So in terms of what the IMF is doing, in terms of resources being made available to your bank, are you seeing any kind of infusion from the developed world to the developing world or not?
We certainly are, and we're of course very grateful for it. Our own capital, for example, will hopefully be more than tripled in the next couple of weeks. The situation is great. Asia is hurting, and I think that's the message I've been giving to my friends and colleagues here in Ottawa, that even though developing Asia will grow, and that's something which is remarkable where everybody else is contracting, growth in Asia is suffering tremendously, and obviously that has very serious social consequences.
Well, this is interesting too, though, and I'm glad you've made that point, because Asia still is growing, and I think the rest of us were saying, well, this is pretty good. They'll be the engine on the train, and they'll pull us out of the recession. But what you're telling me is that may not be the case.
Well, it probably will be the case in the long run. But Asia will grow this year, for example, at 3.4%, which sounds great, excepting it is 6 percentage points lower than 2 years back. And economies in Asia need to grow at a fast clip just to be able to absorb the unemployed. And China, for example, will grow this year, we think, at 7%. Great, but it needs to grow at 8.5 just to keep the unemployment levels at what they are. So there are huge social consequences of reduced growth, and that's what we're very concerned about.
Well, in China particularly, the social consequences are political instability. As workers are told to go back to the villages from whence they came, and they left those villages because they had nothing to do and wanted to work in factories. Now they're going back to nothing to do.
And that's the whole point, that in countries, not only just China, in India, in Vietnam, in Thailand, all over, there is no viable social protection network. There isn't any unemployment insurance. There isn't health insurance. So what could be a start of a social crisis can actually exacerbate even further because of all these systems not being in place.
And become a political crisis.
And then become a political crisis. And therefore, I think what you're seeing in Asia is a social crisis, which is a possibility. I don't want to overdo it, but the two faces of Asia, one which is glitzy and doing very well, the engine of growth, the other where you've got 600 million people still poor at less than $1 a day, they are diverging, and that's my concern.
Tell me how the Asian Development Bank works in this sense. Do you have to be in an Asian country to qualify for the loans, or can you be someone making an investment in an Asian country and get a loan from your bank?
No,
and I'm thinking about the big development in Vietnam that Canadians are interested in.
Well, you have to invest in Vietnam, or you have to invest in an Asian country to get our support for any private sector investment. But otherwise, 90% of our operations are really through the governments themselves in Asia Pacific. So we basically support the governments through our lending and our technical assistance windows.
And is the same thing happening in developing countries that has happened in developed countries, which is that private sector lenders are not offering credit, and so it's fallen back on either in the United States, the government pushing the credit through the banks, but still really it's the government offering the credit, or in other places just the government offering the credit.
2 points here quickly, Don. One is that in Asia, the banking sector is fairly solid. Banks are still very well capitalized. Non-performing loans are less than 5%. So it is not a banking sector crisis. But it is true that banks are obviously reticent about lending to anybody, unless someone is a top-tier client. And the second point is that the gaps have to be made up by the governments, who themselves may not have much fiscal space, excepting for China. So institutions like us have to step in to make up this financing gap, and that's where we come in. This year, for example, we are expecting our lending operations to be about $16 billion, almost 50% more than last year, to make up for the shortfall.
And just briefly, what are you telling the Canadian government? Because Latin America is now the focus point, and the Prime Minister was just at the Summit of the Americas and promised another $5 billion for Latin American development, but money isn't infinite, as you know.
No.
Just very briefly.
First of all, I'm saying thank you, because Canada was very, very supportive of the Asian Development bank in our capital increase. Secondly, what I'm saying is the fight against poverty in the world has to be fought and won in Asia. Either win or lose is going to happen in Asia because that's where the numbers are.
Very interesting. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you.